The water seared through Charles Scora's high-tech diving suit like a plasma torch, the exotic corrosive elements threatening to reduce the hardened space marine to primordial sludge in mere seconds. This was no earthly ocean. The caustic alien sea of Enceladus would annihilate any unprotected being, dissolving them to their fundamental particles. But to the astonishment of the aquatic alien Suliban, as they surrounded the intruder, Charles remained impossibly unscathed. Charles had been deployed to this remote water world on a critical solo mission to find a lost human exploration team. But as he stood before the enraged Suliban, their city crumbling around them under the onslaught of a kraken roused to fury by the human presence, Charles realized this op had just exploded into a one-man war. Every human on Earth was now unknowingly depending on him infiltrating the aliens' advanced underwater civilization and stealing the secret of their fusion tech to give humanity an edge in the brewing interstellar conflict. But Charles would have to survive the crushing depths first. The armored Suliban aimed their weapons at him, screaming demands to know how this soft-bodied creature could withstand the lethal elements that were currently eating through his armor. Charles tried to explain his disintegrating diving suit, but the aliens thought his immunity could only mean he was an enemy spy, engineered to infiltrate them. That's when a mountain-sized tentacle swept a tsunami through the city, instantly killing dozens of Suliban and blasting Charles through a shattered structure. As he smashed down through twisting wreckage, the Marine felt the icy sting of the deadly ocean finally penetrate his breached suit. Charles had only seconds to live before the water turned him to genetic soup. But death did not come, because Charles Scora suddenly discovered that he was invulnerable. Somehow, against all odds, human biology was immune to the exotic material of this alien sea. His mission had just changed drastically. Now, it was up to him to defeat the Kraken single-handedly and save the Suliban city. The fate of both their civilizations depended on it. Charles Scora sucks in a deep breath and dives into the searing alien sea, his breached diving suit now nothing more than dead weight. The corrosive water that should have melted him in seconds instead flows over his skin harmlessly as he kicks his legs, propelling himself through the depths with astonishing speed. The rampaging Kraken looms ahead, its tentacles lashing through the water, reducing Suliban structures to rubble. Charles narrowly evades a swipe from one of the massive appendages, barrel rolling to the side. He rockets upward, positioning himself above the Kraken's bulbous head. The beast's single eye, as large as a bus, stares balefully up at him. Charles balls his fist and throws his entire weight behind a punch aimed directly at that monstrous orb. His knuckles connect with a sickening crunch, and the Kraken reels back, momentarily stunned by the force of the blow. From the ruins of their city, the Suliban leader Wazin and his warriors watch the battle unfolding in slack-jawed awe. He's not just surviving the water, Wazin says, unable to tear his gaze away. He's fighting the Kraken head-on, alone. Charles seizes the moment of distraction to grab one of the Kraken's flailing tentacles. Using it like a rope, he swings himself onto the creature's broad back and begins raining down punches on its thick hide, searching for any chink in its natural armor. The Kraken bucks and writhes beneath him, smashing through more buildings as it tries to dislodge its unexpected rider. Charles realizes that if he doesn't lead this thing away from the city, there won't be anything left to save. His eyes land on a long, wickedly sharp shard of metal debris. He snatches it up and drives it deep into the Kraken's flesh, eliciting an ear-splitting shriek of pain and fury from the beast. The Kraken whirls, forgetting the city, intent only on crushing the thing that dared to wound it. Charles kicks off from its back and shoots through the water, the alien Leviathan in pursuit. He has to pour every ounce of strength into his swimming as he leads the beast away from civilization and into the open ocean. The Kraken's tentacles stab through the water around him like harpoons, missing him by inches. When he sees an opening, Charles twists and strikes back, his makeshift spear finding its mark again and again. The two titans collide in a whirling dervish of violence, their struggle whipping the sea into a churning maelstrom. Wazin and the other Suliban trail behind them, keeping a safe distance but never letting the human out of their sight, captivated by his primal ferocity. As they grapple, Charles spots an eerie glow pulsing from the Kraken's underbelly. A weak point. It has to be. He lets out a sharp laugh, the sound lost in the roar of the breakers. He has a plan. A stupidly dangerous, borderline suicidal plan, but a plan nonetheless. Charles stops fighting the next tentacle that snakes around him and allows it to drag him in close. The Kraken's putrid breath washes over him, its maw yawning wide enough to swallow him whole. At the last second, Charles kicks out, changing his trajectory. He angles his spear up as the Kraken slams him against its underside, right at that pulsing glow. Charles feels the weapon punch through the softer flesh and sink deep into the organ beneath. He doesn't stop pushing until nearly the entire length has disappeared inside the beast. The Kraken screams, an otherworldly sound of agony that vibrates the water around them. Its grip on Charles slackens and he pushes off, desperate to put some distance between them. Luminous blue blood clouds the water, gushing from the grievous wound. Charles watches the beast writhe and convulse, still unsure if the injury will be fatal or merely severely piss it off. The Suliban draw closer, Wezen at their head. Where before Charles saw only hostility and fear in their eyes, now he sees something else. Respect. A glimmer of hope. Wezen raises his hand and barks an order. As one, the Suliban warriors aim their weapons at the wounded Kraken and open fire, a barrage of energy blasts and projectiles boring into its massive form. Charles darts back into the fray, snatching up another piece of debris-turned harpoon. He and the Suliban circle the mighty Kraken, harrying it from all sides, searching for the killing blow as the waters around Enceladus thunder with the fury of their battle. The final blow struck true. Charles's makeshift harpoon pierced deep into the Kraken's glowing underbelly, unleashing a torrent of luminous blue blood. The beast thrashed violently, its tentacles flailing in a desperate attempt to dislodge the human clinging to its hide. But Charles held fast, twisting the weapon deeper as the Suliban warriors unleashed a barrage of energy blasts around him. With an otherworldly shriek that shook the very ocean, the Kraken's movement slowed. Its massive eye rolled back and its tentacles went limp. The titanic creature began to sink, disappearing into the inky depths of Enceladus's alien sea. Charles kicked away from the falling carcass, his lungs burning as he propelled himself to the surface. He broke through with a gasp, treading water as he surveyed the carnage around him. The Suliban emerged from the waves, their eyes wide with disbelief. Wezen, the Suliban leader, swam towards Charles. You killed it, he said, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. How are you still alive? The water should have dissolved you by now. Charles looked down at his body, realizing for the first time that his suit had been completely shredded during the battle. The corrosive alien sea lapped at his bare skin, yet he felt no pain. I don't know, Charles admitted, examining his unmarked flesh, but I think we have a lot to talk about. Wezen nodded, gesturing towards the damaged city. Come, you've earned our trust and gratitude. We have much to discuss. As they swam back, Charles marveled at the Suliban's swift response to the destruction. Teams of workers were already mobilizing, wielding strange devices that seemed to manipulate matter itself. Shattered structures began to reform before his eyes, broken pieces flying back into place and fusing seamlessly. Your tech is incredible, Charles said, watching a toppled spire right itself. I've never seen anything like it. Wezen's facial tentacles twitched in what Charles assumed was a smile. We've had millennia to perfect our methods, though I must admit, your own abilities are far more fascinating. Tell me, how long have humans possessed such resistance to corrosive elements? Charles shook his head. We don't. At least we're not supposed to. I'm as confused as you are. Over the next few days, Charles found himself the subject of intense study. Suliban scientists poked and prodded him, taking samples of his blood and tissue. They submerged him in tanks filled with increasingly caustic solutions, each time emerging unscathed. It's remarkable, one scientist declared, examining a holographic display of Charles's cellular structure. Your body isn't just resisting the corrosive effects. it's adapting to them, integrating the exotic elements into your very biology. Charles stared at the swirling patterns of light, trying to make sense of it all. What does this mean? For me and for our species? Weezin placed a webbed hand on Charles's shoulder. It means, my friend, that you may be the key to a new era of exploration and survival for both our peoples. As word of Charles' abilities spread through the recovering city, he noticed a shift in the way the Suliban regarded him. Many looked at him with hope, even reverence. Others kept their distance, whispering among themselves when they thought he couldn't hear. One evening, as Charles helped repair a communications array, he overheard a heated argument between two Suliban workers. "He could be our salvation," one insisted. "Imagine what we could learn from him." The other hissed in response, "Or he could bring ruin upon us all. What if others come looking for him? We've stayed hidden for a reason." Charles filed the exchange away, his mind racing. There were clearly larger forces at play here, mysteries that extended far beyond his own strange immunity. He needed answers, and he knew just where to start looking for them. Approaching Weizin, Charles made his request. "I want to study your research on the water's composition, and I need access to your historical records, particularly anything related to other alien encounters." Weizin hesitated, his inner eyelids blinking rapidly. "That's sensitive information, Charles. Why the sudden interest?" "Because I think there's more going on here than either of us realizes," Charles replied. "The missing human team, my immunity, the Kraken attack, it can't all be coincidence. And I have a feeling your people know more than you're letting on." For a long moment, Weizin was silent. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. "Very well, I'll grant you access to our archives. But be warned, Charles Scora. The truths you seek may be more dangerous than you can imagine." As Charles delved into the Suliban databases, piecing together fragments of hidden history, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something monumental. The fate of two civilizations, perhaps even the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. And somehow, inexplicably, he found himself at the center of it all. Charles stared at the holographic display, his eyes wide with disbelief. The data scrolling before him revealed something extraordinary about the alien sea's composition. "This can't be right," he muttered, running the analysis again. But the results were undeniable. The exotic elements in the water, while lethal to most life forms, contained unique properties that enhanced cellular repair and longevity. It explained his miraculous survival and adaptation to the hostile environment. Charles burst into Weezin's chambers, startling the Suliban leader. "I've found it!" Charles exclaimed, projecting the data onto the wall. "The water isn't just corrosive, it's regenerative. Look at these cellular repair rates." Weezin's facial tentacles twitched as he absorbed the information. Fascinating. But what are the implications? "Don't you see?" Charles paced excitedly. "This could revolutionize medicine, extend lifespans, maybe even—" "Or it could destroy everything we've built," interrupted a gravelly voice. An older Suliban scientist, Krell, emerged from the shadows. "Some forces are not meant to be tamed, human." The news spread through the underwater city like wildfire. Charles found himself at the center of a heated debate. Some Suliban hailed him as a savior, while others eyed him with suspicion and fear. Despite the opposition, Charles convinced Weizin to let him conduct further experiments on himself. In a sealed chamber, under the watchful eyes of Suliban scientists, Charles submerged himself in a concentrated solution of the exotic elements. The pain was excruciating, but brief. As he emerged gasping, Charles felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. He felt stronger, faster, more alive than ever before. "Incredible," breathed one of the scientists, reviewing his biometric data. "Your cellular structure is evolving, adapting to the elements at an exponential rate." But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. A group of Suliban, led by the fiery-eyed Zir, began protesting outside the research facility. "The human will destroy us all," Zir shouted to the gathering crowd. "He'll deplete our resources, upset the balance we've maintained for millennia. That night, alarms blared through the facility. Charles rushed to find smoke billowing from the lab, equipment smashed and data cores destroyed. Zier's handiwork, no doubt. As Charles helped clean up the mess, he noticed something odd, a fragment of unfamiliar technology among the wreckage. It bore markings similar to those on his missing team's equipment, but subtly different. Digging deeper, Charles uncovered a disturbing truth. The disappearance of the human explorers hadn't been an accident. There was evidence of an unknown alien race, somehow connected to Zier's faction, that had orchestrated the whole thing. "Wesen, we need to talk," Charles said grimly, presenting his findings. "I think my arrival here has stirred up something big, something that's been brewing for a long time." Weazen's face darkened. "I feared this day would come. There are forces at work here beyond your understanding, Charles. Ancient conflicts that have shaped our history. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, the human outsider and a group of loyal Suliban warriors. As they worked to uncover the truth, the situation grew increasingly volatile. One morning, Charles awoke to find the city in chaos. Zier's followers had taken control of key facilities. Worse, they'd captured Wesen. A message crackled over the city's communication system. "Surrender yourself and your research, human, or watch this city burn. The choice is yours." Charles stood before the holographic display, his expression resolute as he absorbed Zier's ultimatum. The choice before him seemed impossible: surrender himself and his research or watch the city burn. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair as he wrestled with the decision. A message flashed across the screen, encrypted and barely legible. Charles leaned in, decoding it with practiced ease. Wesen's words appeared. "Do not give in. The future of our people is at stake." Charles's eyes narrowed. He wouldn't abandon Wesen or the Suliban to Zier's madness. "We're going in," he announced to the small group of loyal warriors gathered around him. "We'll strike under cover of darkness." Zyra, Wesen's trusted lieutenant, unfurled a holographic map of the stronghold. Her webbed fingers traced potential entry points as she spoke. "These tunnels here, they're ancient and mostly forgotten. We might be able to slip through undetected." For hours they pored over the schematics, plotting their infiltration. As the city's bioluminescent lights dimmed to simulate night, Charles and his team donned stealth gear and slipped into the murky waters. The tunnels were cramped and treacherous, filled with swirling currents that threatened to dash them against jagged rocks. Charles pushed forward, his enhanced strength allowing him to power through sections that would have stymied a normal human. They emerged into a dimly lit chamber, only to find themselves face to face with a group of Zier's sentries. Charles reacted instantly, his augmented reflexes kicking in as he ducked under a swing from an electrified staff. He grabbed the weapon, wrenching it from the sentry's grasp and using it to incapacitate two more guards in quick succession. Beside him, Zyra moved with fluid grace, her natural Suliban agility complemented by years of combat training. Together they cleared the room, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in their wake. As they pressed deeper into the stronghold, the resistance grew fiercer. Charles found himself locked in close-quarters combat, trading blows with opponents who seemed to melt out of the shadows. His fists connected with satisfying thuds, his enhanced strength sending foes flying. But even as they fought their way forward, Charles could see the toll it was taking on his Suliban allies. They were outnumbered and starting to tire. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, they burst through into a vast chamber. A shimmering energy barrier pulsed before them, its surface rippling with exotic power. Beyond it, Charles could make out Wesen's form, slumped and motionless. "It's powered by the ocean itself," Zyra gasped, her eyes wide. "We can't breach it." Charles studied the barrier, noting the concentrated stream of glowing elements feeding into it. An idea formed, dangerous and potentially suicidal. "I can," he said quietly. Before anyone could stop him, Charles stepped into the stream. Pain exploded through every nerve in his body, his muscles seizing as the raw energy coursed through him. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain standing as his cells began to adapt and metabolize the exotic elements. Slowly, agonizingly, the barrier began to flicker and weaken. Charles pushed harder, drawing more of the energy into himself. His vision blurred, his ears ringing with the sound of his own screams. With a final surge of effort, the barrier collapsed. Charles stumbled forward, his body smoking but rapidly healing. "Go!" he shouted to his team. "Get Wezen!" As the Suliban rushed to free their leader, Charles found himself face-to-face with Zir. The dissident leader's eyes blazed with fanatical fury as he charged, wielding a crackling energy weapon. Charles ducked and weaved, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to stay just ahead of Zir's attacks. He could feel the raw power still surging through his veins, lending him strength and speed beyond anything he'd experienced before. Zir swung wildly, his weapon carving glowing arcs through the air. Charles saw an opening and struck, his fist connecting with Zir's midsection with bone-crushing force. The Suliban leader crumpled, gasping for breath. With Zir subdued and his followers quickly rounded up, Charles helped Wezen to his feet. They emerged from the stronghold to find a crowd of Suliban citizens gathered outside, their faces a mix of awe and apprehension. Wezen stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "My people, we stand at a crossroads. For too long we have hidden ourselves away, fearing the unknown. But today, we have seen what can be accomplished when we embrace new possibilities." Charles joined him, addressing the crowd. "The power within your oceans is not something to be feared, but understood. Together, we can harness it not for destruction, but for the betterment of all our peoples." As the Suliban murmured among themselves, Charles knew this was only the beginning. The real work of healing the divisions within their society and forging a new path forward was just starting. But for the first time since he'd arrived on this alien world, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Charles stood before a packed amphitheater, his heart racing as he prepared to address the gathered Suliban. The bioluminescent walls pulsed with an anticipatory glow, matching the energy of the crowd. "Today," he began, his voice carrying through the water, "we stand on the brink of a new era for Enceladus." With a nod to Wezen, Charles stepped into a specially designed chamber. The exotic elements swirled around him, their eerie light casting dancing shadows across his face. The crowd watched, transfixed, as Charles's body absorbed the elements. His skin shimmered, wounds from previous battles visibly healing before their eyes. Emerging from the chamber, Charles effortlessly lifted a piece of heavy equipment that would have challenged even the strongest Suliban. "This is just the beginning," he announced, his enhanced senses picking up the excited murmurs rippling through the audience. In the days that followed, volunteers lined up outside the research facility. Zira, her facial tentacles twitching with nervous energy, was among the first to step forward. "Are you sure about this?" Charles asked as he calibrated the exposure chamber. Zira nodded, her eyes gleaming with persistence. "Our people need to see that it's not just you who can harness this power." The initial trials were fraught with tension. Some volunteers emerged from the chambers energized and transformed. Others writhed in pain, their bodies rejecting the foreign elements. Charles pored over data screens, his enhanced mind processing information at lightning speed. "There," he muttered, pointing to a specific genetic sequence. "That's the key." Working tirelessly, Charles and the Suliban scientists refined their approach. They developed tailored protocols for each volunteer, carefully adjusting the element concentrations based on individual genetic profiles. Gradually, success stories began to outweigh the failures. Suliban emerged from the chambers with increased strength, accelerated healing, and sharpened senses. The once skeptical populace began to embrace the possibilities. But as Charles watched another successful trial, a gnawing worry took root. He noticed subtle changes in the cellular structure of long-term subjects, signs of potential degradation. Locking himself in the lab, Charles worked around the clock, combining his knowledge of human biology with Suliban technology. He emerged days later, exhausted but triumphant, clutching data pads filled with gene therapy protocols and regenerative treatments. As word of their breakthroughs spread, diplomatic envoys from other undersea civilizations arrived at the Suliban city. Wesen led the negotiations, his steady voice echoing through the grand meeting chamber. "We offer this knowledge freely," Wesen declared, "in the spirit of cooperation and mutual advancement." Some races recoiled from the idea, their representatives visibly uncomfortable with the notion of altering their biology. Others leaned forward, intrigued by the potential benefits. An agreement was struck, and the Interspecies Scientific Consortium was born. Charles found himself working alongside beings of diverse physiologies and backgrounds, all united in their quest to unlock the secrets of the exotic elements. Late one night, as Charles analyzed data from the latest consortium experiments, an anomaly caught his eye. He called for Wesen, his voice urgent. "Look at this," Charles said, projecting a holographic model of the element's molecular structure. "These aren't naturally occurring. They're engineered." Wesen's eyes widened as he absorbed the implications. "You mean—" Charles nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "These elements are leftovers from an ancient alien civilization, one far more advanced than anything we've encountered." As the significance of their discovery sank in, Charles and Wesen shared a look of awe and trepidation. They stood at the precipice of unraveling a cosmic mystery, one that could reshape their understanding of life itself. Charles stood before the shimmering ruins, his eyes scanning the ancient structures. The bioluminescent glow of Suliban technology cast eerie shadows across the crumbling architecture. He reached out, his fingers brushing against a weathered surface. "Over here!" Zira's voice cut through the water. Charles turned to see her webbed hands carefully extracting a gleaming crystal from the sediment. As they worked, more crystals emerged from the ruins. Each one pulsed with an inner light, defying the erosion that had claimed everything else. Charles felt a familiar tingle as he approached them, his enhanced cells resonating with the alien technology. In the makeshift lab they'd set up nearby, Charles placed his palm on a crystal surface. The world around him blurred, replaced by a stream of data flooding his consciousness. He gasped, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. "What do you see?" Wesen asked, his tendrils twitching with anticipation. Charles's eyes darted back and forth, processing the data. "They were creators," he breathed. "The elements. They engineered them to shape life itself." Days turned into weeks as Charles and the Suliban scientists pored over the crystal's contents. They uncovered records of countless worlds seeded with the exotic elements, each one a vast genetic experiment. Enceladus was one of them, Charles explained, projecting a holographic map of the moon. "The Suliban, the other species here, you're all products of accelerated evolution triggered by these elements." The implications stunned the assembled team, but as they delved deeper, a sense of unease grew. Charles found himself pacing the lab, his enhanced strength causing tremors with each step. "There's more," he said, his voice tight. "The elements are unstable. Without proper regulation, they trigger uncontrolled mutations. That's what happened to the ancients. They lost control and—" He trailed off, the weight of extinction hanging in the water. Alarm spread through the Suliban scientists. Wesen's face hardened as he processed the information. "We must inform the consortium immediately." In the grand meeting chamber, representatives from various undersea civilizations listened with growing concern as Wesen outlined their findings. Murmurs of fear and fascination rippled through the crowd. "These elements pose too great a risk," one delegate argued, his bioluminescent patches flashing with agitation. "We must cease all experimentation immediately." "But think of the potential," another countered, her voice filled with wonder. "If we can harness this power safely, we could achieve evolutionary leaps beyond our wildest dreams." Charles watched the debate unfold, his mind racing. He thought of the transformations he'd undergone, the power coursing through his veins. An idea formed, daring and potentially catastrophic. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the din. "I have a proposal," he announced. All eyes turned to him. What if we had a way to contain and stabilize the elements, to control the exposure and adaptation process? Weazen's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting, Charles? Charles took a deep breath, steeling himself for the reaction his words would bring. Me. I can use my enhanced abilities to act as a living catalyst, a buffer between the raw elements and those we expose to them. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some delegates recoiled in horror, while others leaned forward, intrigued by the possibilities. Charles stood firm, his gaze unwavering as he faced the storm he'd unleashed. In the lab, Charles began preparations for the experiment that would push the boundaries of his enhanced physiology. He calibrated equipment, double-checked containment protocols, and ran countless simulations. Zyra approached him, concern etched on her features. Are you sure about this, Charles? The risks are necessary, he finished, meeting her gaze. We need to understand these elements, to control them. Otherwise, we're just waiting for history to repeat itself. As the debate raged on in the political sphere, Charles focused on the task at hand. He knew that what he was about to attempt could change everything, for better or worse. With steady hands, he activated the containment field, ready to face whatever the ancient elements had in store. Charles felt the raw power coursing through his veins as he stepped out of the containment chamber. The air around him crackled with energy, and he could sense the exotic elements responding to his mere presence. The assembled crowd of representatives from various undersea civilizations watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. Weazen approached cautiously, his tentacles twitching with nervous energy. Charles, how do you feel? Charles took a deep breath, his newly heightened senses overwhelmed by the influx of information. He could hear the rapid heartbeats of everyone in the room, smell the subtle differences in the water currents, and even perceive the faint electromagnetic fields generated by the Suliban technology. I feel alive, Charles replied, his voice resonating with a new depth and power. The elements, Weazen. I can control them, shape them. To demonstrate, Charles extended his hand, focusing his will. A swirling vortex of glowing particles coalesced in his palm, dancing and shifting at his command. The gathered scientists gasped, their data pads lighting up with frantic readings. Zyra pushed through the crowd, her face a mix of scientific fascination and concern. Charles, the readings we're getting, they're off the charts. Your cellular structure has completely rewritten itself. Charles nodded, absorbing this information. He could feel the changes within himself, the newfound strength and resilience. It's more than that, Zyra. I can see the potential in everything around us. The elements aren't just a power source. They're a key to unlocking the next stage of evolution. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the representatives, a being with bioluminescent patches pulsing rapidly, stepped forward. This is madness. You've turned yourself into a living weapon. How can we trust that you won't lose control? Charles turned to face the skeptical representative, his eyes glowing with an inner light. I understand your fear, but I'm not a weapon. I'm a bridge, a way to safely harness the element's power for the benefit of all our species. To prove his point, Charles approached a nearby control panel. With a mere touch, he interfaced directly with the Suliban technology, streams of data flooding his consciousness. In seconds, he had optimized the facility's power grid, increasing efficiency by 200%. Incredible, Weazen breathed, checking the readouts. He's done in moments what would have taken our best engineers weeks. Charles addressed the assembled crowd, his voice carrying easily through the water. What I've become isn't an ending. It's a beginning. Together we can unlock the full potential of these elements, advancing our civilizations in ways we've only dreamed of. As he spoke, Charles could sense the shifting emotions in the room. Fear and suspicion began to give way to curiosity and hope. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since discovering the true nature of the exotic elements, he felt a sense of purpose and direction. Zyra approached, her initial apprehension replaced by purpose. What's our next step, Charles? Charles smiled, the glow of the elements pulsing beneath his skin. Now, we learn, we experiment, we push the boundaries of what's possible, but most importantly, we do it together. The research facility buzzed with renewed energy as scientists from various species began to collaborate, their previous rivalries forgotten in the face of this new frontier. Charles moved among them, his enhanced intellect allowing him to contribute to multiple projects simultaneously. As he worked, Charles couldn't help but wonder about the ancient civilization that had created these elements. What had been their ultimate goal? And what other secrets might be waiting to be uncovered in the depths of Enceladus? With each passing moment, Charles felt his connection to the elements growing stronger, more intricate. He knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would reshape the future of not just Enceladus, but potentially the entire galaxy. The waters of Enceladus churned with unrest as news of Charles Scora's transformation spread across the undersea civilizations. In the Grand Council chamber of the Interspecies Consortium, voices rose in a cacophony of conflicting opinions. "He's the key to our future," shouted a Suliban representative, his bioluminescent patches flashing with excitement. "With his mastery of the elements, we could achieve evolutionary leaps beyond our wildest dreams." "Or lead us to extinction," countered a member of the crustacean collective, his claws clicking nervously. "We've all seen the data on what happened to the ancients. How can we trust that he won't lose control?" Charles stood at the center of the maelstrom, acutely aware of every word, every subtle shift in the water currents around him. His heightened senses picked up the rapid heartbeats of those who feared him, the eager whispers of those who saw him as a savior. Wazin stepped forward, his tentacles spread wide in a gesture of peace. "We must approach this with caution, but also with open minds. Charles has shown remarkable control over—" A thunderous boom cut off Wazin's words as the chamber's massive doors burst open. A hulking figure strode in, flanked by heavily armed warriors. Their armor gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, covered in pulsing bioluminescent patterns that mimicked the exotic elements themselves. "Vordax," Wazin hissed, his normally calm demeanor shaken. The leader of the militant Vordax race surveyed the room with cold, predatory eyes. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the water with artificial amplification. "This farce has gone on long enough. The human is an abomination, a threat to the natural order of our world." Charles felt the spike of aggression before Vordax even moved. He threw up a shimmering barrier of elemental energy just as Vordax's forces opened fire. Chaos erupted in the chamber as diplomats scattered and Suliban guards rushed to defend their guests. "Charles," Zyra called out, her warrior's instincts kicking in as she fought her way to his side. "We need to get you out of here." But Charles stood his ground, expanding his protective barrier to shield the fleeing diplomats. He locked eyes with Vordax, feeling the hate and fear radiating from the militant leader. "This isn't the way," Charles said, his voice carrying easily through the din of battle. "We can work together, use this power to benefit all our species." Vordax snarled, hefting a massive energy cannon. "Your very existence is a threat to everything we've built. You will be eliminated." The cannon fired, a searing beam of concentrated energy that would have vaporized any normal being. But Charles was far from normal now. He reached out with his mind, feeling the exotic elements that powered Vordax's weapon. With a thought, he disrupted their flow, causing the beam to dissipate harmlessly against his barrier. Vordax's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with rage. "All forces converge on the facility. Leave no stone unturned. The abomination must not escape." As Vordax and his warriors retreated, Charles turned to Wazin and Zyra. "We need to evacuate the research facility. It's not safe here anymore." They raced through the twisting corridors of the Suliban city, Charles using his elemental control to clear debris and create shortcuts where needed. The sounds of battle echoed all around them as Vordax's forces clashed with the Suliban defenders. At the facility, Charles erected a dome of swirling elemental energy, buying them time to gather essential data and equipment. Zyra coordinated the evacuation, her voice steady as she directed terrified scientists and support staff to safety. "Charles!" Wazin called out, his tentacles working furiously over a control panel. I've initiated the data purge, but there's so much we'll lose. We'll rebuild, Charles assured him, even as he felt the increasing pressure of Vordax's assault on his barrier. Right now, we need to focus on getting everyone out alive. A thunderous explosion rocked the facility, and Charles's barrier flickered. Through the temporary gap, he saw wave after wave of Vordax's forces advancing. Their numbers seemed endless. We can't hold them off forever, Zyra said, her warriors forming a protective ring around the remaining evacuees. Charles nodded, making a split-second decision. Get everyone to the deep city shelters. I'll hold them off and join you when I can. Charles, no! Wazin protested, but Zyra was already ushering him towards the escape route. As the last of the evacuees disappeared into the twisting undersea tunnels, Charles took a deep breath. He let his barrier drop, feeling the raw power of the elements surging through him. Vordax's forces poured into the facility, weapons trained on the lone figure standing before them. Charles raised his hands, and the very water around him began to glow with otherworldly energy. You want to see what I'm capable of? He called out to the advancing army. Then let me show you. With a thought, he unleashed the full fury of his elemental control. The facility erupted into a maelstrom of energy and light, the battle for the future of Enceladus beginning in earnest. The waters of Enceladus churned with a mixture of hope and trepidation as Charles Scora stood before the gathered representatives of the Interspecies Consortium. The Grand Chamber, once a battlefield, now served as the stage for a bold experiment in unity. Charles raised his hands, his skin pulsing with otherworldly energy. I stand before you not as a threat, but as a bridge, he said, his voice carrying easily through the water. Today, we take the first step towards true understanding. Wheezin floated nearby, his tentacles twitching nervously. Are you certain about this, Charles? The risks are necessary, Charles finished, meeting his friend's gaze. We can't move forward divided. They need to experience this power for themselves. One by one, representatives from various races approached. Some moved with eager anticipation, others with barely concealed fear. Charles focused his will, channeling his elemental mastery into a series of crystalline conduits that hummed with potential. Asulaban was first, his bioluminescent patches flaring as Charles infused him with a fraction of elemental power. The being gasped, his eyes widening as new sensations flooded his consciousness. I can feel the currents, he whispered in awe. The very molecules of water dancing at my command. Next came a member of the crustacean collective, her hard exoskeleton gleaming in the chamber's light. As the power flowed into her, she clicked her claws in astonishment. The mineral composition of the seabed, she exclaimed. I can sense it, analyze it instantly. The procession continued, each recipient experiencing a profound shift in perception. Even the most vocal critics found themselves speechless, overwhelmed by the vast potential suddenly at their fingertips. But then tragedy struck. A Vordax representative, his face contorted in a mix of ecstasy and agony, began to convulse violently. His armor cracked and split as his body twisted into impossible shapes. Others soon followed, their forms warping and mutating uncontrollably. Charles! Wazin cried out in alarm. Something's wrong! Charles acted swiftly, his hands weaving complex patterns through the water. Shimmering fields of elemental energy coalesced around the afflicted individuals, halting their grotesque transformations mid-process. I've contained them, Charles said, his voice strained with effort and regret. But I can't reverse the mutations, not yet. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some called for an immediate halt to the experiments, while others demanded more safeguards. Through it all, Charles stood firm, his eyes fixed on the suspended forms of those he had failed to protect. This is the reality we face, he addressed the crowd, his voice cutting through the din. The elements offer unimaginable potential, but also great risk. We must learn to harness this power responsibly, or risk losing everything. As the gravity of the situation sank in, a tense quiet fell over the assembly. Those who had successfully received the elemental infusion looked at their hands in wonder and fear, newly aware of both the gift and the burden they now carried. In the days that followed, a fragile truce took hold. Races that had once been bitter enemies now found common ground in their shared elemental experience. Yet others remained skeptical, choosing to distance themselves from what they saw as a dangerous gamble with the fabric of reality itself. Charles worked tirelessly, refining his techniques and searching for a way to help those trapped in stasis. The weight of his responsibility pressed heavily upon him, driving him to push the boundaries of his newfound abilities. As preparations began for the next phase of their journey, Charles found himself standing with Wiesen and Zira in the heart of the Suliban city. The bioluminescent structures pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to echo the flow of elemental energies. "You're really leaving?" Zira asked, her voice tinged with sadness. Charles nodded, his gaze fixed on the swirling currents above. "There's so much more to learn, to discover. We need to find other worlds touched by these elements, understand their true nature." Wiesen extended a tentacle, gently touching Charles' shoulder. "And I'll be with you every step of the way, my friend." As they said their goodbyes, Charles couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and possibility in equal measure. But as he boarded the sleek interspecies vessel, surrounded by a crew united in purpose, he knew that this was only the beginning of their grand odyssey. The ship's engines hummed to life, propelling them towards the vast unknown. Charles took one last look at Enceladus, the world that had changed everything. As they broke free of the moon's gravitational pull, he silently vowed to return one day, armed with the knowledge and wisdom needed to...
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.